From a starting start in the late 1970s, bonds created from mortgage on single family homes grew to more than 350 billion by 1881. Teaching was also good for Wall Street because the firm's underwriting the mortgage-backed bonds could sell to various prices for more money um, than the sum of the world, and bankers could extract rich fees. Plus, of course, Wall Street could make money from trading the new securities. 1908. According to a report by the Securities and Exchange Commissions, by the end of 2001, that number had risen to 3.3 trillion pesos. Teaching was also good for Wall Street because the firms underwriting the mortgage-backed bonds could sell the various prices for more money than the sum of the world, and bankers could extract rich fees. Plus, of course, Wall Street could make money from trading money than the sum of the world, and bankers could extract rich fees. Plus, of course, Wall Street could make money from trading the new securities by 1983. According to Business Week, Raniere's Montage Financial Group at Salomon Brothers accounts for close to half of Salomon in profits, along with Young bonds. Mortgage-backed bonds become a defining feature of the 1980 financial markets. Teaching, however, was not the only necessary ingredient. A second important factor was the involvement of the credit rating agencies Moody's, Standard and Poor's, and later Fitch Ratings. Ranieri pushed hard to get the rating agencies involved because he realized that investors were never going to be comfortable with, or to be blunt, willing to work hard enough to understand the intricacies of the hundreds or thousands of mortgages inside each security. People didn't even know what the average length of a mortgage was. Ranieri would later recall, "You need to impose instructors that were relatively simple for investors to understand, so that they didn't have to become mortgage experts. Investors understood what ratings meant, and Congress and the regulations for placed such trust in the rating agencies that they had designated them as nationality recognized starting ratings organization, or among other things, the law allowed investors who weren't supposed to take much risk, like pension funds, to invest in certain securities if they had a high enough rating. Up until then, the rating agencies had built their business entirely around corporate bonds, rating them on the scale from AAA, the safest of the safe. The BBB, the bottom rung of the what was to call it investment grade, and all the way to the default are at first they resisted rating these new bonds, but they eventually come around as they realized that trading mortgage-backed securities could be a good secondary business, especially as the volume grows very quickly. They become an integral part of the process, and so-called structured finance become a key source of profits for the rating agents. And the third thing Reuters and Funk need in order to make mortgage-backed securities appealing to investors, they needed Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. At around the same time, Renery and Fink were trying to figure it out. To make mortgage-backed securities work, Fannie Mae was going broke. It was losing $1 million a day and rushing to work, a collapse that could have been one of the most disastrous in modern history, as the Washington Post later put it, as interest rates skyrocketed. Fannie found itself in the same kind of their trouble as many of the tears, and for the same reason. Unlike Freddie Mac, which had offloaded its interest rate risks to investors, Fannie Mae had kept the 30-year fixed rate mortgage it bought on its books. Now it was choking on those mortgages thing got so bad that it had a month to go. Charts measuring how long it could survive if interest rates didn't decline. It had even devised a plan to call up the Federal Reserve to save it if the banks stopped lending it money. Two things say Fannie Mae fears the banks never did stop lending it money. Why? Because their working assumption was that Fannie Mae's status as a government sponsored enterprise with its central role in making 30 years mortgage possible for middle-class Americans meant that the federal government will always be there to bail it out if it ever got into serious trouble. Although there was nothing in the state privatization Fannie Mae that stated this explicitly, and Fannie excused the base who spent decades coyly, then that they had an unspoken government safety net. That's what everyone believed over time. Fannie's Mae's implicit government guarantee has, as it come to be called, become a critical source of its power. And the second thing that saved Fannie Mae was the arrival in 2081 of David Maxwell as its new chief executive. Maxwell's predecessor, a former California Republican congressman named Alan Oakley Hunter, was not particularly astute about business, nor were the people around him during the Carter administrations, when he should have been focusing on the effects of raising interest rates on Fannie's portfolio. He had instead spent his time feuding with Patricia Harris, Carter's Secretary of Housing and Urban Development. Like Hunter, Maxwell had once been a Republican. A Philadelphia native, he graduated from Yale, where he was a champions tennis player, and in Harvard, where he studied law before joining the Nixon administration as general counsel of HUD. When he has approached to run Funny, he was living in California, running a mortgage insurance company called Ticker Mortgage, and he converted um, to the Democratic Party because he felt that in California that was the only way to have any influence. I was businessman Maxwell to the says now. A businessman was exactly what Fannie Mae needed. Jim Johnson, the Democratic power broker who succeeded Maxwell as Fannie's CEO in the 1890, will later says that he stabilized the company as a long-term firm in housing finance. Judy Kennedy, an affordable housing advocate who worked for Freddie Mac, has a lobbyist in the late 1980, but it more grandly. She calls Maxwell a transformed figure. Maxwell was gracious and charming, the sort of man who sent handwriting notes open his office door to all his employees and took boxes of books with him to read on vacations. But he was also incredibly taut, with blue eyes that could turn steely cold. He did not tolerate mediocrity. He could afford to. He was fighting for the survival of the company and anyone, no matter what level, who was not up to the tax leave or was asked to leave, says William Bill Maloney, who spent 2 decades as Fannie's chief lobbyist. During Maxwell's 10 years reign, Fannie had for president and burned out lower level executives. When Maxwell retired, the company's head of communication made a video that showed corporate cars moving in 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 and out of Fannie's office with body bags in the trunks. Maxwell immediately began running Fannie in a more business-like fashion. He tightened the starters fertile loans that Fannie bought. He put in new management systems under Hunter. Fannie used to buy mortgages as much as a year in advance. That meant that lenders had time to see where interest rates were going. The then show of only unprofiled loans on Fannie. Maxwell changed that too. What couldn't change was the combinations of recent and every tight Washington fell toward Fannie Mae. There was Maxwell cites tremendous disdain for Fannie. All over Washington, there were people doing stressful, important jobs for not a lot of money, and here was this place on Wisconsin Avenue where people did work that wasn't anymore challenging, and yet by Washington standards they made good amounts. He remembered taking his wife to a dinner party shortly after they arrived in town. By the time we left, she was in tears and I was close. He later recalled. Fanny's ostentatious headquarters didn't help. Under Hunter, the company had moved from modest things of 50th Street to a building in Georgetown that resembled a giant mansion. The front sections had been occupied by an insurance company. To pull the back to match perfectly, Fanny has a brickbat roofing specific. To supply the proper brick, to many people it was a living symbol of power and Aaron said cites Maxwell. Yet for all their resentment, people were envious of many men's employees. They all wanted crushing jobs there so they could get rich too. It happened over and over again. Maxwell says, the same people who had power over you, whether they were